When my mother first decided to open a marriage office in one of the spare rooms of our modest home, it felt like the start of a new chapter in our lives. I still remember the day she hung a small wooden sign on the door, painted by a neighbor, that simply read, Marriage Bureau. It was nothing fancy, just a table, two chairs, a notebook, and a cupboard filled with files, but for us it carried the promise of dignity, independence, and hope. My mother's face glowed with determination, and I could see in her eyes that she was not doing this merely to earn money. She believed with all her heart that she was performing a noble service for the community. This work is about fixing destinies, she would often say to me with pride. Every girl deserves a home, a partner, and security. If I can play even a small role in that, then my life has meaning. Her words echoed in my mind like a sacred vow. As a child who had grown up watching my mother struggle alone after my father's death, I admired her resilience. But this venture made me admire her even more. To me, she was no longer just a mother providing meals and shelter. She was a woman shaping lives, protecting the vulnerable and offering second chances where society often closed its doors. The results of her efforts seemed to prove her right. Within months, families from the neighborhood and even surrounding villages began to visit our home. Women with hopeful eyes would sit in front of her, their hands trembling slightly as they passed on their details, photographs, and whispered dreams of the kind of husbands they wished for. My mother would listen with patience, writing everything down carefully, asking the right questions, and assuring them that she would do her best. Slowly, her name spread. People said, if you want a good match for your daughter, go to her office. I felt proud every time I overheard such praise. On more than one occasion, I met women who had returned after their weddings just to thank my mother. They brought sweets, shared stories of their new homes, and even held her hands with tears of gratitude. I watched these moments with shining eyes and whispered to myself, what an incredible woman my mother is. She doesn't just find husbands for these girls, she restores their faith in life. During this time, I was still completing my university studies, so my involvement was limited. But in my heart, I carried a quiet dream that once my studies were finished, I would join her fully. I imagined myself sitting beside her, learning how to match families, bringing smiles to anxious brides, and continuing this legacy. It seemed to me not just a profession, but a mission of hope, dignity, and compassion. At that stage, I never questioned her. Why would I? Everything looked so pure, so honorable. My mother was my role model, and her work was a reflection of her strength. I could not have imagined then that behind the shining curtain of this noble beginning, there might be shadows I was not yet ready to see. When I finally completed my university studies, my very first thought was not about pursuing a corporate career or applying for a prestigious job in the city. Instead, my heart drew me back to the little office at home where my mother had been changing lives one file at a time. For years, I had silently admired her dedication. Now, at last, I felt it was my turn to step in, to learn from her, and to serve alongside her. I approached her with excitement. I can still recall the look on her face as I said, Mother, now that I am free from my studies, I want to sit with you in the office. I want to learn everything you do. I expected her eyes to brighten, as they usually did whenever I showed interest in her work, but instead her expression froze. The warmth drained from her face, and a seriousness I rarely saw in her took its place. No, she said firmly, almost too quickly. This work is not for you. Think of something else. Her tone struck me like cold water on the skin. I blinked at her, unsure if I had heard correctly. This was the same mother who often spoke with pride about how her work was noble, how it brought joy to countless families. Why then would she deny me the chance to be part of something so honorable? At first, I tried to reason with her. I told her how much I admired her, how I wanted to follow in her footsteps, how I dreamed of making her proud, but her answer never changed. This work is mine, not yours, she insisted. You are meant for a different path. Her refusal left me confused and wounded. I could not understand why she would close the door on me so harshly. If the office was truly about helping girls, what harm could come from me watching, learning, and eventually assisting her? What secret could there possibly be? Outwardly, I obeyed her. I smiled, nodded, and told her I would think of other things. But inside, a storm had begun to brew. Every time I heard voices coming from the office, I longed to know what was being said. Every time I saw a girl leave with tears of gratitude, I ached to hear her story. I was not suspicious of my mother, not yet, but I was puzzled, unsettled. Why keep me out of something that was supposed to be good and honest? In the days that followed, my curiosity grew stronger. I tried to distract myself with books, hobbies, even meeting friends, but my mind would always wander back to that small wooden sign on our wall, Marriage Bureau. Behind that door, something was happening, something my mother clearly believed I should not witness. Was it because she thought I was too young, too naive? Or was there something deeper, something she did not want me to see? I had no answers then. All I had was a gnawing feeling in my chest, a feeling that this secrecy carried a weight heavier than I could yet imagine. Days turned into weeks, yet my mother's refusal continued to haunt me. Each time I watched her walk into the little office with her files pressed against her chest, I felt as though she was locking away a world from me, a world I longed to enter. Her stern words echoed in my mind, "This work is not for you." But the more she tried to keep me away, the stronger my curiosity grew. The turning point came unexpectedly. One morning, my mother announced that she would be traveling out of the city for a few days to attend a distant relative's wedding. For the first time in years, the office was left unattended. The key rested on the shelf, as though daring me to take it. I hesitated at first, scolding myself for even considering it. But as the hours passed, temptation tightened its grip. By evening, I could no longer resist. With trembling hands, I unlocked the cupboard and pulled out a stack of files. At first, everything seemed ordinary: names, ages, family details, phone numbers. But as I turned the pages, patterns began to emerge. Certain names repeated across multiple forms, and the same contact numbers appeared under different entries. There were addresses listed in foreign countries, some of them incomplete or suspiciously vague. My heart began to race. I reminded myself that my mother was an honest woman, respected in our neighborhood. Surely there must be an explanation, I told myself. Yet the more I read, the more my unease grew. Many files spoke of girls who were supposedly married abroad, yet there were no wedding photographs, no records of their new families, just a name of a city or a scribbled note about travel arrangements. The papers seemed less like marriage documents and more like fragments of a puzzle, one that hid more than it revealed. I felt my hands shaking as if I were holding something dangerous, something I was never meant to touch. My mind screamed at me to close the files and put everything back before my mother returned. But another voice inside whispered, "There is a secret here. Find it." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts swirling in endless circles. I loved my mother deeply, but why would she keep me away from work that appeared so noble? Why did these files feel incomplete, as though they were hiding stories darker than the ones she told? It was the first time doubt entered my heart, and once doubt enters, it never leaves quietly. After my mother's trip, I tried to act normal, but something inside me had shifted. Those strange files lingered in my thoughts like an unfinished story. I wanted answers, yet I was afraid of what those answers might be. So when I asked my mother once again if I could sit with her in the office, not to handle papers, but only to watch, my voice carried a quiet determination. Perhaps she sensed it, for after a long pause, she finally agreed. "You may sit for a few days," she said, her tone cautious. "But only watch. Do not touch anything." I was thrilled. At last, I would see her work unfold before my eyes. The next morning, I joined her, sitting quietly in the corner of the small office. The first thing I noticed was how the atmosphere seemed so different from what I had always imagined. Women entered with colorful dresses, their faces painted with hope, anxiety, and in some cases, desperation. Some spoke eagerly, describing their dreams of marriage. Others sat silently, their eyes lowered, as though weighed down by invisible burdens. At times, I felt inspired by their courage, but often something felt off. A few of the women repeated the same sentences in oddly rehearsed ways. Some looked frightened when they spoke. I noticed their glances darting nervously toward my mother, as if waiting for her approval before answering my polite questions. When I whispered to my mother later about these women, she brushed me aside. "Every woman has her own story. Don't concern yourself with details." Her dismissal left me unsettled. The unease deepened when one particular case crossed my path. While tidying the table, I noticed a file left open. It was about a young woman who had supposedly married abroad, but the papers inside were unusual. Instead of wedding details, they contained information from a travel agency, tickets, visas, but no groom's name, no photographs, nothing resembling a marriage record. My mother quickly snatched the file from me, scolding me for prying. That night, my mind replayed the faces of the women I had seen, their nervous eyes, their forced smiles, and behind it all, my mother's stern gaze warning me not to dig deeper. Yet I could not silence the questions in my heart. Why did these women look afraid? Why did the files speak of travel more than marriage? And why did my mother, once my symbol of integrity, now feel like a stranger guarding secrets I was not meant to know? The seeds of doubt had grown roots, and I knew sooner or later I would have to uncover the truth. Ramsha's disappearance ignited something inside me that I could no longer suppress. It was no longer a matter of curiosity, it was a matter of truth, of justice, of conscience. If my mother's words had once reassured me, now they only rang with hollow authority. Each explanation she offered sounded more like a wall built to keep me out than a door to let me in. I knew I had to look beyond her words. One afternoon, while my mother was out visiting a client, I slipped into the office. My hands trembled as I opened the drawers where the older files were kept. Each folder bore names of women my mother had proudly claimed to have married off. Yet as I flipped through them, a pattern emerged. Names repeated, often linked with different men in different countries. Addresses were vague, sometimes listed as industrial areas or incomplete street names that seemed impossible to trace. What unsettled me most were the phone numbers. Almost every file had at least one, but when I dialed them secretly from my own phone, they led nowhere. Disconnected lines, men's voices claiming ignorance, or numbers that didn't exist at all. It was as though these identities were stitched together with threads of lies. I sat at the desk, clutching a file of a girl named Sadia, who, according to the documents, had married in Oman. Her picture stared back at me, young, innocent, hopeful. But the address listed for her was a warehouse district. A quick search online confirmed it. No residential homes, no communities, just rows of empty industrial buildings. My heart pounded. What had become of her? That night, I barely touched my food. My mother asked if I was unwell, her voice softer than usual, but I could not meet her eyes. Inside me was a war between the loyal daughter who once saw her mother as a saint and the woman I was becoming, who could no longer ignore the weight of the evidence. The faces of the missing girls began to form a silent crowd in my mind. They were not just names on paper. They were daughters, sisters, women with dreams that had been crushed in silence. And all of it seemed to be orchestrated under the roof of my home by the very woman I loved most. I knew now that Ramsha's case was not an exception. It was the rule. My mother's marriages were not unions of love, but disappearances into the shadows. And I could not rest until I discovered where those shadows truly led. The more I uncovered, the more restless I became. I could not carry the weight of silence any longer. Each time I sat across from my mother at the dinner table, her calm eyes felt like veils hiding storms. I wanted to believe that she was still the woman who raised me with tenderness, who held my hand when life hurt, who whispered prayers over my head at night. But the files and the lies gnawed at my soul. One morning, unable to hold myself back, I confronted her. I placed a folder on the table, one I had taken secretly from the office. It contained documents of another girl who had supposedly been married abroad, yet the details were inconsistent, the signatures clumsy forgeries. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. Mother, these are not real marriages. Where are these girls actually going? Her face stiffened instantly. She didn't even glance at the file. Instead, she looked at me with cold authority, the way she looked at her clients when she wanted to silence their doubts. You don't understand what you're saying. These are delicate matters. Stop interfering before you ruin everything. I pressed harder, my voice rising with desperation. I met Ramsha. I saw her fear, and now she's gone, just like the others. Don't lie to me, Mother. Tell me the truth. Her hand slammed on the table, startling me. Enough, she shouted, her voice sharper than I had ever heard in my life. You came here to learn, not to interrogate. If you cannot respect my work, then stay out of it. Do you hear me? For a moment, I was frozen. I had never seen her so furious, her words so sharp, her eyes filled with something that almost looked like fear. It wasn't just anger. There was a flicker of panic behind her tone, as though she knew I was close to unraveling something she had spent years keeping hidden. I swallowed my tears, but inside, my heart broke. My mother, my anchor, was treating me like a stranger. It was then I realized she wasn't only trying to silence me to protect herself from shame, she was afraid that I might expose everything. That night, as I laid in bed, my mother's words echoed like thunder: "Stay out of it." But instead of deterring me, they only strengthened my resolve. I could not stay out of it. Not when lives were at stake, not when the truth was buried beneath the very roof I called home. For the first time, I admitted to myself my mother was not just hiding secrets, she was living inside them. And if I didn't act, I would lose not only the missing girls, but perhaps my mother herself to the darkness she had chosen. The tension in the house had grown unbearable after my confrontation with my mother. She no longer spoke to me with the warmth I once knew. Instead, there was a guarded sharpness in her tone, as though every word was weighed before leaving her lips. I knew she was watching me more closely now, suspecting that I had seen too much. But if she thought her silence and threats would stop me, she was mistaken. I could not do this alone. The files I had found were disturbing, but I needed someone with knowledge and experience to help me understand what I was really holding. That was when I thought of Mr. Kareem, a retired police officer who lived a few streets away. He was known in the neighborhood as a man of honor, respected for his integrity even after leaving the force. I had grown up seeing him sit on his porch, reading the newspaper, always with a calm seriousness. I decided to take the risk and approach him. One afternoon, while my mother was out, I gathered a few of the most suspicious files and hid them under my coat. My hands were shaking as I walked to Kareem's house, praying silently that no one would see me. When he opened the door, his weathered face looked surprised at my sudden appearance. "What brings you here, child?" he asked kindly. I hesitated, then whispered, "Please, Uncle, I need your help, but you must promise me this stays between us." His brows furrowed, but he nodded and ushered me inside. I spread the files across his table, my voice quivering as I explained everything I had discovered: Ramsha's disappearance, the forged signatures, the incomplete addresses, the vanishing girls. As he read, his expression grew darker, his jaw tightening with each page. Finally, he leaned back and looked at me gravely. "My child," he said slowly, "these are not marriage records, these are trails of trafficking. What you see here is a system, a network. Your mother is not just arranging marriages. She may be part of a ring that trades women under false pretenses." The words struck me like a storm. I felt my chest tighten, my throat dry. Hearing my suspicions spoken aloud by someone like him turned my unease into undeniable truth. He advised me to be cautious, to gather more evidence before taking any step. Do not confront her again until you know exactly what you are dealing with. Networks like these are dangerous, and people who run them will go to great lengths to protect themselves. I nodded, though fear churned in my stomach. For the first time, I realized the risk I was taking, not only for myself, but for every girl trapped in this dark web. Still, I left his home with a new sense of purpose. My mother's secrets were no longer just mine to uncover. They were crimes. Crimes I had a duty to expose. After meeting Mr. Kareem, I returned home with my heart heavy yet sharper in its resolve. The files were disturbing enough, but his words replayed in my mind endlessly. This is trafficking. This is a network. I knew then that suspicion was no longer enough. I needed undeniable proof. And the proof, I was certain, lay hidden in the one thing my mother guarded more fiercely than anything else: her laptop. That device was like a part of her body. She never left it unattended, carrying it in her handbag wherever she went. I had often seen her typing late at night, her face illuminated by the cold blue glow of the screen. Whenever I asked what she was working on, she would smile vaguely and say it was paperwork. But now I knew better. The secrets of her so-called marriage office were locked inside it. One evening, while she was praying in her room, I saw my chance. She had left the laptop on the table, the black case half unzipped, as though daring me to touch it. My palms grew damp as I slid it out carefully and carried it to my room. My heart hammered in my chest. Every second felt like a drumbeat announcing my betrayal. But it was not betrayal, I reminded myself. It was survival, not just for me, but for countless girls like Ramsha. I switched it on. A password box blinked at me, cold and challenging. For a moment, despair clenched my stomach. What if I could not get past this barrier? Then I remembered something simple yet powerful: my mother's birthday. I typed it in, the screen unlocked, my breath caught in my throat. Inside, a storm of files awaited me. I opened the first folder and felt the blood drain from my face. Dozens of photographs stared back at me, young girls standing in airports, holding passports, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Another folder revealed hotel room pictures, some with men sitting beside the girls, their expressions triumphant, while the girls' eyes screamed silently for help. Shaking, I clicked on a video. The sound nearly made me drop the laptop. A girl, no older than 17, sobbed uncontrollably while a voice I recognized immediately, my mother's voice, echoed coldly in the background. "Stop crying. If you speak, you'll be sent to a place where no one will ever find you." Tears blurred my vision. I slammed the laptop shut, then forced myself to reopen it. I copied as many files as I could onto a USB drive I had hidden in my drawer. My hands moved quickly, almost instinctively, driven by desperation. Each folder I copied felt like both a victory and a dagger, cutting deeper into my heart. When the transfer was done, I sat frozen, staring at the device that had just destroyed my image of my mother. The woman who once told me stories of goodness and charity was the same woman threatening helpless girls into silence. At that moment, I realized there was no turning back. I had evidence, not just suspicions, not whispers, but undeniable, damning proof. But with that proof came a decision that tore me apart. Should I confront her with it, or should I go directly to the authorities? Either way, I knew one thing. My mother's hands were no longer clean, and by staying silent, neither would mine. The weight of the USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than any stone I had ever carried. It contained not just images, documents, and videos. It carried the souls of girls whose voices had been silenced, and the burden of a mother's darkest secret. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows whispering the same question over and over. What will you do now? For hours, I debated with myself. A part of me still clung to the image of my mother, the gentle woman who held my hand when I was afraid of the dark, who sacrificed her own comfort so I could finish my education. Could I really hand her over to the authorities? Could I condemn her to a life behind bars? But then, the other part of me, the stronger, fiercer part, reminded me of Ramsha's terrified eyes, of the sobs I had heard in those videos, of the countless mothers still waiting for their daughters to return. Silence would make me an accomplice. Silence would mean blood on my hands. At dawn, I rose, washed my face, and looked into the mirror. My eyes were swollen, but they held clarity. For the first time, I spoke aloud to my reflection. Truth is heavier than love, but truth is what saves. I dressed and walked straight to the police station, my steps slow but firm. When I entered, the officers looked up, curious about the young woman clutching a bag to her chest. I asked to speak to a senior officer. After a few minutes, I was ushered into a small office where a stern-looking man sat behind a desk. "My name is—" I paused, gathering courage. "I am here to report a crime." He raised his eyebrows but gestured for me to continue. With trembling hands, I placed the USB drive on his desk. "My mother runs a marriage office, but it's not marriages she arranges, it's trafficking. This drive has the evidence." The silence that followed was suffocating. The officer stared at me, searching my face for signs of deceit. "Do you understand what you're saying? This is your mother you're accusing." "Yes," I whispered, my throat tight. "But a crime remains a crime no matter who commits it." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll verify this. If it's true, your testimony will change everything." Hours later, the evidence was confirmed. I watched from the window of our house as police cars pulled up, red and blue lights slicing through the dusk. My mother stepped out of the doorway, her wrists bound in handcuffs. Her eyes found mine, and her voice cut through the chaos. "You sold me out!" Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't look away. I whispered to myself, "No, I saved them." That night, the house was silent, emptier than ever before. The air carried the ache of betrayal, but beneath it, a strange peace settled into my soul. I had chosen truth over blood, justice over silence, and though my heart was shattered, my conscience finally breathed.